Knows. God, so good. So I want to welcome you to Monterey Center. I'm grateful to see your faces here. And first, some of you, not all of you I know, but some of you are wondering what this is. And many of you will remember that for years we had a Jewish congregation that met in our building. And they had a need to do something else, find a different kind of place to be. They were here for years, and we loved having them here and loved having their consciousness here, especially this time of year, which is the New Year and the High Holy Days in the Jewish tradition. And one of the former members of B'nai Torah has joined a community called the Independent Minyan of, I think, Monterey County or Greater Monterey. And they asked if they could rent our sanctuary for this year's Jewish High Holy Days, which started last week with Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, and will continue this week with Yom Kippur and the Day of Atonement, the day of forgiving and opening up and releasing whatever went not well in the past year, so we can open to receive God and to be that place for God to show up in the new year. I'm getting nods, okay. That was my interpretation. So we're delighted to have a Jewish community in here again and lend their consciousness, because I believe that everything a group of people does everything anybody does adds to the consciousness in the world. And when we have a group, any group that comes here that is adding to a consciousness of expansion, of growth, of more God, of more peace, of more freedom, then I welcome that consciousness into our center. So I was so grateful to have them, and this is what's called the Ark. And the Ark is the holy resting place for the Torah, the books of scriptures that to people in the Christian tradition are called the Old Testament. To people in the Jewish tradition are the Hebrew scriptures. And so this ark is the home for the Torah. So it is wonderful to have this behind me, supporting all of us in the remembering that for Jewish people all over the world, this is a new year. And for us as metaphysicians, it reminds us that any day is the opportunity to be a new year. Because any day, any moment is the opportunity to make a fresh start and know something new for ourselves and know something new for our lives. And it was interesting that as I was putting together the talk this day, I just kept finding, without really looking that way, finding several stories and things that come from the Jewish tradition. So, it's all happening. It's all happening. So, Happy New Year, everyone. This month, we are being awake to growth. Each month this year, we have used a theme of being awake to some aspect of life or some aspect of spirit. Because being awake is the foundation, if you will, of living the spiritual life, is being awake to myself, what I'm doing, what's working, what's not working, being awake to that, and being awake to what's possible. So this month, we're being awake to growth, which can sound like a funny turn of phrase. But the truth is, there is something within us, something within each and every one of us that is calling us to grow. Always. There is something within each of us calling us to grow. In the Talmud, which is a mystical book from the Jewish tradition, it is said this way: it is as if angels are standing over each blade of grass, whispering to it, grow, grow, grow. And that must be true, because you've all seen grass growing up through the concrete, dandelions growing up, splitting through the concrete. So there must be angels calling it to grow where it's not easy. But it grows anyway because it's being called, and in the call is what is needed for the growth. We'll return to that idea later. In the call is what is needed for the growth. The founder of this teaching, or the great synthesizer as we call him, because he took from all the world's spiritual traditions, Ernest Holmes, speaks often about the divine urge that is nudging us to be more, express more, to grow. He has a wonderful little book called You, which is one of my favorite because it's short bites of those reminders of that divine urge. He also has a book called A New Design for Living that he talks again. He always is talking, though, really. Every book he has, he's talking about that divine urge within us to grow. And so he calls it the divine urge. The Talmud says it's angels above us. We might call it our soul's longing. We might call it God, or we might just call it, and this isn't a just, life, calling us to grow. But now, for some of us, there's a few ways that we misunderstand when we hear this about call to grow. We misunderstand it. And so we then block it or avoid it. And one way is because we want to think that we're done. Do you know anybody who thinks they're done growing? Sometimes, unfortunately, and I know it's not you, Rob. But he'll stand up. I'm done. I'm done. Perfect. Learn from this man. Because, the one thought is, if you're alive, you're not done growing. If you're alive, you're not done. But when we think we're done, then we start closing ourselves off to that divine urge. I once taught a class where there was this person, I don't know, about in their 40s or so, who midway through the class called me and said, I'm not going to take the class anymore. I've done this. I know this. I really, I know this stuff. I'm kind of, and I said, okay. I thought it was so interesting that there was a much older person in this class, a much older person who I esteemed very much, who I knew was steeped in their spiritual practice, and who I would go to for counsel or wisdom much more than I would go to this 40-year-old. And that person never said a word about, I already know this stuff. And that was just a reminder to me to when I think, I already know that, to stay open, in Zen they call it beginner's mind, to be open to growth, knowing that even doing something that's the same can open me up. Because I'm not the same each time, I can be opened up to something new. It was a great lesson for me to say, no, I'm not done. That growth is a lifelong thing. There's a great story about a rabbi. There's so many great stories about rabbis. That he was a very revered man. And every day, throngs of people would come to him, hanging on his every word. They would come for his advice. They would come for his wisdom. They would come for anything, for him, for his teachings, anything. And just every word, they just hung on every word. Oh, Rebbe, oh, Master, please tell us, teach us. But you know what? There was one guy. There was one guy who every time he came, he did not hang on the rabbi's words. He did not revere the rabbi. He challenged him on every teaching. He made fun of him. He was one of those people, saw his weaknesses and made mention of them and criticized for him. And the other people were just like, who is this guy? Why does the rabbi stand for him? Why doesn't he tell him to go away? And they just thought he must be of the devil. He is such a jerk. I'm sure they used another word. He is such a jerk. Well, one day, this devil died. And all the people who came every day were kind of like, oh, we're supposed to be very sad. They went to his funeral and they were trying to, but inside they were like, yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, yes. But the rabbi was absolutely plunged into grief. And the people were just, they couldn't figure it out. And they said, Rabbi, are you grieving for his soul because it's probably not gone to a great place? And the rabbi said, no, I know that he's in heaven. I am grieving because he was my only true friend. He was the only one who challenged me. And now that he's gone, with no one else to challenge me, I'm afraid I'll stop growing. And he burst into tears. For any of us who think we're done, this points the way, the great rabbi, knowing that there is always more to dig deeper. So, I'm sorry, Rob. I'm sorry, everyone. You're not done. Now, I know what I tend to get into, which is a completely different thing, is I can have this idea about growth as because I'm not okay. That I need to grow so I'll be better, so I'll be smarter, so I'll be more compassionate. You may have your own list for me, those of you who've been my congregants for a while. Yeah, she needs to grow in this way. I know I did. When I had a senior minister, I had the list for her. I kept wondering why God didn't seem to have the same list for her. But so sometimes when I hear growth, instead of like, oh, yay, it's more like, yeah. Because I'm listening to it from a place of not okayness. And that sometime maybe I'll grow enough to be okay. That's not what the growth is. Because we're not growing, we're not being called to grow into something different than what we are. We may think that, but we're being called to grow into more of who we are. And that who we are is that spiritual magnificence, is the divine in us. We are growing to reveal that more. There's also another idea from Judaism, and I was trying to look it up to make sure I was accurate, and I didn't find it in some of the things I had, is that there's a story about part of the beginning of the earth, that there's this big mirror that is the divine. And the mirror breaks into millions of pieces. And there's a shard of that mirror. See, I thought that was the sparks of the divine, the Shekinah, but just go with me on this one, because it's such a great metaphor. And I may have mixed it. Maybe it's Japanese. But that, it is said that there's a shard of that divine mirror in each of us. And like a splinter, because I got the splinter metaphor working its way to the surface, and I thought, well, that's kind of ucky. How do I compare that to the truth? So then I remembered this, whatever it is. So that shard is like a splinter, works its way to the surface. Because it is the truth of us wanting to shine out, wanting to shine as the light that we are. Not some better, changed version of us, but the truth of who we are, working its way up. That who we really are is wanting to be revealed. We are led to grow into that. Ernest Holmes would say the divine urge wanting to reveal itself, more of itself as us. And it is that which resides at the center of each of our being, the infinite, that is ours to express more of. That is the growth. Now there's a third thing about growth, and that is that idea, because I know you've all had situations where you knew 20 years later that you grew, but they weren't fun to go through. And at some point this became coined as another growth opportunity. And some people who shall remain nameless put another descriptor in there that said how that wasn't about wonderful, another growth opportunity. So there's that part of us that goes, oh great, so you're telling me to expect another growth opportunity. And we start holding them as suffering or as punishment. Like I didn't get good enough, so I'm being punished, and then I'll grow. But what's true is that it is not a punishment. It is that life that is always urging us, that is bringing us to whatever it is that we need to grow. And it's only punishing if we don't realize there's a hand of the divine in it. And if we realize that there is that divine that is supporting us through it. As I said, whatever we are called to, the divine also is there within us to support us through it. There's a great example I read about. This person was telling about having lived in Minneapolis when the Mississippi River there way overflowed its banks. Now, she wasn't talking about New Orleans. I was like, well, wait, what? But in Minneapolis, what happened that there are these reeds that grow to just above the surface of the Mississippi River there. And that year, which was I think 93, when it flooded, it was 6 feet over its normal. The banks were 6 feet higher than normal. And it was found that the reeds grew 6 additional feet. They had never grown that tall. But they grew that extra 6 additional feet because they needed to reach the sunlight. Now, it wasn't that somebody came along and said, uh-oh, look, this is flooding. I better put some Grow-Right on that stuff. There was something already in those reeds that had what it took to give them what they needed to get the sun, to grow. And so I take that again as a metaphor for us. Whatever we are growing through, there is already that within us which can equip us. Doesn't mean sometimes those AGOs aren't difficult. But if we can think of them not as punishment and that we're going to be drowned and overwhelmed, but look within us to find what is in here, what is the divine wanting to grow, and what do I have, what can I develop to support me in growing, then we will. That is how we are made, with whatever it is that we need for our growth. And that whatever we need, again, is the divine. We live in, and this is another quote from Ernest Holmes, I just love his metaphors too. We live in an eternal partnership with spirit, with the infinite, with the divine. Eternal. It is always living and creating with us if we get conscious of it. When we think we're all out here alone, oh my God, I got to figure this out, then things are hard. They are hard to grow through. Our own human history and the way we've done things before often is not sufficient. The old height of the reeds was not sufficient for a new circumstance. But if we remember that who we are is not our history, who we are now in this physical form is not even the fullness of who we are, that we are so infinite beyond measure, and that we have the divine always in us, as us, through us, with us, co-creating to grow us. So a question I have for you this morning is, are you listening to that call to growth? Are you answering it, or are you avoiding it? You know, are you using the idea that I can't be more, I'm only this and this and this. I can't grow. I've reached the level. The infinite in us is only limited by us. It in its very nature is unlimited. The only thing that limits the divine is our willingness to express it and the limits we place on ourselves. Now, we also can have a limited idea of God, of the infinite. And if we just sort of read about this thing called God in books, don't take any time to open to it ourselves, to have our own experience of it, then of course we limit it. Because we don't let ourselves see who and what it is in us, around us, and everywhere present. So that's that spiritual practice thing that I'm always harping on. That to know the divine, to know spirit, to know God, and to experience for ourselves its vastness, and then claim that for us and for our lives, we have to take time to be with it. We have to take time to contemplate it. And in that time of contemplation, then we start seeing, what is it that I am called to grow into more fully? Because each of us was created, we look different, and the only reason for that is that each of us was created to express some different aspects of God, some different aspects of life. So what I may be called to grow into may not be what you're being called to grow into at this particular time. Some of you, life may be calling you to grow into more joy. Maybe life is calling you to grow into more beauty. Maybe life is calling you to grow into more peace. I know for me, as I look at the newspapers and think about what's happening in Syria, a country that I've been to, and that is not really here nor there, except it's real to me when these beautiful cities are being bombed and destroyed, and real to me when people I saw as loving and welcoming and open-armed to me as an American are getting bombed. That makes it personal. And so in my own prayer work, because I'm not getting God to fix something out there, I'm saying, grow me into more peace. Where do I need to be more peaceful? Where am I adding to the disharmony in the world by my criticism, by my judgment, by my desire to go to war with something I don't like. And so that popped up in my prayer to grow into myself being more peaceful, so that I can be an assistance in disarming the people around me. But the work is disarming myself. So that's something I'm called to grow into right now. So what is it for you? And are you listening? Are you asking? As I said earlier, each day is a new moment. This is also one of Ernest Holmes' favorite sort of injunctions, is each moment is a fresh starting point. So our call to growth, we don't have to stop it. We don't have to worry about the fact that maybe we had been avoiding it. Maybe we hadn't been listening. Maybe we hadn't been asking. That's okay. We can start now. And step by step, thought by thought, we open to what is ours to grow into. More wisdom, more joy, more intelligence, more abundance, more peace, whatever it is. And then in the next moment, maybe it'll be something else. But we listen, and then we contemplate that aspect of God and let it grow in us. And in that way, in a sense, each of us is growing toward the same thing. We are growing Godward. That sunshine that the reeds were trying to reach is also a great vision of how we are each growing Godward. Not because God is outside, but because that, like that wonderful woman in the banner there, because when we reach up, we can feel expanded. We feel more. So, step by step, thought by thought, we grow Godward. That is the call to growth for all of us. Let's go within. So as I turn my attention to this infinite that we may call spirit, we may call Allah, we may call Adonai Eloheinu, we may call life. We know that that life is infinite and it is our life now. And as I open to the infinite, I open to all that the infinite is. I know the vastness of its love, the vastness of its joy, the vastness of its intelligence, the vastness of its light to move into every situation and lift it. And I know that vastness is centered in me. And so right here and right now, I listen for what that vastness is calling me to grow into. And I invite each and every person here to take this moment to ask and listen. What is this vastness calling me to grow into? Is it more intelligence? A greater intelligence to guide my life? Is it more peace? Is it more abundance to open myself up to the good that surrounds me? Is it more wholeness and vitality? it calling me to experience more life? Is it calling me to greater joy, to be more permeable to joy and delight? Is life calling me to greater love, to be that place where God shows up as love and compassion? And so in this moment, just see what it is for yourself right now. There are no wrong answers. And so knowing that we ask and we listen in this moment, I know that I have given that infinite permission to pour itself in me as that peace, to pour itself in each of us as that which we claim for our growth. And as we claim it, as we open up to it, we find that aspect growing in the way that we express in our daily lives. That we are more compassionate with our friends and our coworkers. We are more lively with life. We have more enthusiasm and joy. We are more peaceful when met with discomfort and challenge. We open ourselves to greater abundance and the wisdom to steward it. Whatever we have claimed, that possibility is now becoming manifest in our lives. As we become, through our growth, allowing more God, we move Godward. That is always and only where we're headed, both within and without. And so I am grateful for this knowing. I am grateful for this growing. I am grateful for this divine within me to do whatever it is calling me to do and be. And I know already that it is done. That my success in moving Godward and growing Godward is assured. So I let it be in great gratitude.